Hi everyone. Today I'm delighted to have a conversation with Nick Wilson, who won an American Wine Society Educational Foundation scholarship in 2024 for his PhD research related to the impact of climate change on viticulture. Hi Nick and welcome, and thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So maybe let's start by if you could take a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell us what really prompted you to engage in grape and wine research.
Okay, sure. Um, so I grew up around Vancouver, basically in a small agricultural town called
Mhm,
Ladner. So
mhm.
I was always around agriculture growing up. Like I was friends with lots of different growers, or friends with the kids of different growers, and I would spend times on farms and things like that. And then once I was doing my biology degree in university, I managed to get a few different internships in agriculture. Um, and so I always enjoyed working with agriculture. I then moved on to grad school at UBC, where basically through these various agriculture internships, I managed to land a grad school position doing grape research. So I wasn't particularly adamant about working with grapes to begin with. I was just
Mhm.
interested in working in agriculture on any crops. But then once I began my master's degree working on grapes, I realized how it's very interesting. It's a very interesting crop to work on just because there's lots of different research going on. It's been researched for a long time. And then, especially in BC, there's a very large viticultural area, the Okanagan. So there's quite a bit of funding going into it as well. So basically, I fell in love with doing research on grapes and viticulture, so I wanted to keep going. So after my master's, I stuck with it, started doing my PhD as well in the same lab. So yeah, now I've been working on during my master's and now as well during my PhD. I just have been working on abiotic stresses for grapevines since that's a major issue in BC.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's pretty much how I got into
that's
this.
that's an interesting journey, and it's probably by chance that we have the chance to know about you and to know about your research. So that's fantastic. Um, let's go talk about the scholarship. So you were awarded a scholarship for your research conducted at UBC at the University of British Columbia, Canada. And this scholarship was sponsored by one of our local chapter, the American Wine Society's chapter of Ocean Isle Beach in North Carolina, on the other side of the continent. Can you tell us about this research? You were studied to talk about it, but can you take us through, your the problem you're trying to solve and how it intends to support the grape and wine industry?
Sure. So basically, there is a bit of a lack of understanding for what mitigation strategies for heat stress exist, or heat waves. So we've been experiencing some pretty severe heat waves in BC, especially in 2021. We had temperatures like reaching past 45 degrees Celsius in our viticultural areas. Um, so my research is focusing on different mitigation strategies. In particular, we're looking at foliar sprays, so different biostimulants that we can spray onto the leaves of grapevines, and we're going to compare different ones to see how these are helping the grapes, basically. Tentatively, we haven't actually fully decided which ones we want to use. We're thinking some seaweed extract, likely salicylic acid, and possibly methyl jasmonate to use those three,
Mhm.
and basically compare how well they do for grapevines and heat waves, whether that's helping photosynthesis keep going or allow them to keep transpiring or allow their fruits to not shrivel or lose quality. So that's one aspect is these foliar sprays as a mitigation strategy. A second mitigation strategy that we will be looking at is varying irrigation levels
Mhm.
and how this can impact different varieties. So one way growers are recommended to deal with heat waves is to basically increase irrigation. This will cause the plants to use more water and help them cool down. Um, but this can depend on the variety. So different varieties will respond differently to varying amounts of water. So we want to test these different irrigation strategies on at least a couple different varieties that behave differently with water to see basically, will this help all grapevines? And we also want to test to see how bad deficit irrigation will be for these varieties during a heat wave.
Mm.
Whether certain varieties will shut down earlier, things like that. So yeah, basically irrigation strategies as a second project, and then a third, final kind of aspect of my PhD will be basically comparing the major varieties that are grown in BC, to see how well that they perform under heat waves, or see how basically how bad the negative impacts of a heat wave can be on the different varieties. So basically, we've run a few different growth chamber experiments where we put about 8 varieties into controlled environments.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, because you cannot really control the heat wave. I mean,
Yeah,
we kind of expect one in a few years, but so
exactly.
you're working on
So we kind of
growth
rely
chambers.
on the weather for
Mm,
vineyard experiments sometimes, but
mm,
in terms of what we can do on campus here, we can use these controlled environment chambers, basically simulate heat waves for different varieties. And we're just basically comparing them to see which ones are very susceptible to heat waves. So whether they're declining in photosynthesis a lot, losing quality in their fruits. And we want to basically rank important BC varieties to help guide growers in the future,
mhm.
as to what grapes might be best to be planted. Because we don't want to be planting really susceptible varieties to heat waves at the moment, knowing that 10 years down the line, these heat waves are likely going to be even more common than they have been in the past.
Yeah.
So,
So a naive question. So using those control chambers to simulate heat wave, I mean, how predictable the screening will be, compared to grapevines that have been planted, for a few years in the ground. Is it really a screening tool, or do you plan to predict other behaviors of the grapevines under the heat waves?
so I do believe that there will be differences likely if you do a vineyard experiment with like
Mm.
established vines versus what we use is just potted vines in a growth
Yeah.
chamber. But I think this can be a good guide at least, to see like what varieties are very susceptible or very strong in heat waves, basically, because we have found so far at least the varieties that are performing poorly in the growth chambers, are also the ones that we've heard from growers have
Mm.
issues with heat waves, or in other literature we've with experiments done in vineyards, these have also had issues. Um, so it's not a perfect comparison, but we still think it is useful. And also
Mhm.
the fact that we will be repeating these experiments 3-4 years, so these will be maturing over time, and we want to see, do these results, are they consistent across the years, and that can help give us a bit of assurance that this might be a real thing that we're seeing.
Oh yeah, good. So you're at the beginning of this project, if I understand
Yes,
correctly.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we've done just 1 year worth of
Mm-hmm.
controlled environment experiments, and the vines were quite young, so they had clusters, but not all of them, and not very much. So we decided to remove them and basically do experiments just on the physiology. But in the future, this upcoming summer, we're going to be basically repeating and repeating, and then
Mm-hmm.
next year once again, just to confirm everything.
Yeah, that's the beauty with annual crops. You have to repeat over the seasons, and the season changes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so can you tell us a little bit more about the experiments in the vineyards? Do you have access to commercial vineyards? Are you using experimental vineyards for your
Yes,
spray? Yeah.
we are working with Andrew Peller Ltd.
Hmm.
A large company here that has many vineyards, and they're helping us basically set up in vineyards. One is called Sandhill. It's
Hmm.
in southern Okanagan, and I'm not quite sure which other ones we'll be using for the foliar spray experiments. But we do have contacts with basically commercial growers that are helping us and allowing us to use their vineyards to do these experiments. And we've worked, or I haven't particularly, but my
Hmm.
supervisor, our lab, has worked with extensively with them in the past, and so we're pretty confident that it'll be a
Oh,
nice.
that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all this research is really to try to understand, immediate mitigation immediate, rapid mitigation strategies to protect in advance the vineyards if there is a weather announcement of a heat wave, and then it's more long term in terms of irrigation strategy and maybe selecting varieties and maybe clones that might be more resistant.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the irrigation strategies and the foliar sprays, these can be like, as long as the growers have a few days of warning, which
Mm-hmm.
hopefully they will,
Yeah.
then they can basically apply these strategies. As far as finding out which varieties are susceptible, that's yeah, exactly more of a long term
Mm-hmm.
strategy. So it's just basically to guide future plantings, what not to plant, what to plant.
Good. Well, very important research, in those times where definitely we are struggling with climate change and we have to adapt to those changes. So very important
Yeah,
research.
yeah,
Uh,
it was a bit ironic actually because we're getting all this funding for heat stress, and then we had a giant cold snap in Okanagan. And then all of a sudden, the growers like shifted their concern. Like, oh, they're very concerned about the cold, and then
oh yeah. Mm.
and we're just waiting for the next heat wave, and I think they'll shift their concerns once again.
Well, yeah. I mean, you cannot really control the weather, can we? So you have 1 year under your belt of this research as a researcher. You plan your design and you start collecting data. Even if it's just after 1 year of collecting this data, did you find anything surprising or unexpected in in your plan, in what you observe in the different treatments that you were examining?
I was surprised mainly at how resilient they were. I was,
Mm.
for example, our growth chambers, they go to 40 degrees Celsius maximum, the ones that I was using. Actually, I was expecting to see much worse results. But surprisingly, about half the varieties we weren't seeing major issues with. So we might
Oh,
actually have to bump the temperature up even higher. So that was
yeah.
a pleasant surprise to see that, because typically once you reach 40, like a lot of crops will begin struggling. Um,
Mhm.
so it's nice to see the grapevines will be a little bit
Surviving.
more resilient than other crops.
Mhm.
So I was a bit surprised at the level of stress we actually had to apply to the plants to see any major issues. For example, we did. I don't think I put this in my application or anything, but we did a kind of a side experiment where we exposed just leaves of these varieties to water baths at different temperatures to try to find out what temperature we actually see damage to the photosynthetic apparatus. So basically, the enzymes involved in photosynthesis. And it was past 45 degrees that we were seeing any damages. Basically, below 45, we didn't see anything. So the reason we were seeing reductions in photosynthesis around 40 was just because the stomata, or basically the leaves, are trying to prevent too much
Mm.
water loss, we think. So it was a bit surprising to me how resilient the grapevines were, I guess. But in the future, we're going to put them through even hotter temperatures and see how that goes. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point it reached close to 50 degrees Celsius somewhere in BC 2 years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And
Mm.
a place called Lytton in BC during
Mm.
our major heat wave in 2021, that was about 49
Yeah,
Celsius. Yeah. So,
that's crazy.
yeah.
So although it's the beginning of your research, you mentioned that you are collaborating with commercial grape growers and wineries, which is fantastic. Did you have a chance already to share some of the outcomes of your research with them? What are their feedback?
I have not actually, just because
Okay.
we haven't done the actual experiments that we plan to do in their vineyards. We've just been doing stuff on campus.
Mm-hmm.
I have. We're also working with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, which is basically the federal government organization here. And in about a week, I will be able to give an update to our collaborator there and hopefully get some feedback. But in terms of speaking to the actual commercial grape growers, I have not had much of an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to do that quite
Yeah.
yet. But looking forward to it this summer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we planned on doing some things last summer, but due to that cold snap I had mentioned,
Mm.
they were they were basically estimating like 95%
Yeah.
loss of fruit, and so they were like, "Don't do the experiments here this summer. Wait a year." So
Yeah. 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 I remember that was devastating. Yeah. So switching, topic a little bit, talking about the AWSEF scholarship. Again, you are at the beginning of your journey here, but how receiving this scholarship really did impact your studies or maybe your career trajectory at this point?
I would say it's just helped me basically feel comfortable being a grad student, essentially. So,
Mhm.
you know, salaries can be quite low. Vancouver is a very expensive place to live. So this has helped me cover like tuition, groceries, basically, so I don't have to constantly worry about things. I can just focus on my studies, which is it's very helpful, honestly, when you don't have a financial worry and you can just think about your research. It makes things quite a
Yeah.
bit easier, to be honest. Um, so I would say it just really helped give peace of mind as a student
Hmm.
to know that I can continue my research and not have to worry about, oh, can I pay my tuition next semester? Will I even be able to continue ongoing? So it's yeah, for that reason, it's very appreciated, honestly.
And we're so happy to be able to support graduate students across North America. So glad that you benefited from last year's scholarship. Did it open any networking opportunities through the scholarship
So I'm
or
hoping.
career opportunity or any sorry to interrupt or any career opportunities or other collaborative opportunities?
um I guess not so far. I would I think in the future I'd likely meet some of the other winners and possibly talk about our research at seminar, or sorry, at a conference. I'm assuming
Yeah.
that the other winners will likely, I'm going to meet them in the future.
Hmm.
So I keep my eye on the winners list, and anytime I go to a conference, I'm hoping to reach out and speak to them about their research. Um, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it for
Yeah,
the answer. Yeah.
that's okay. Um, so you you started your studies in grape and wine research by quote unquote accident. But now that you've been, involved in that field, meeting people from the industry, your collaborators in different academic institutions, if you could give maybe one piece of advice to somebody considering entering this type of studies or this type of work, what would that be?
Sorry, you said advice to anybody who's considering the same
Uh,
type of research, or
or doing research in grape and wine in the grape and wine field.
okay. Hmm, advice for somebody doing research. I would say to try to figure out what you actually find really interesting. Maybe read about some research that's going on. It can be even in magazines, like for example, like
Mhm.
Orchard and Vine magazine. I think there's several magazines that have posted about research in not super technical language.
Mhm.
Um, And I would basically look at all the different types of research that is going on and try to find what you're actually passionate about. Um,
Mhm.
like science can be very different from each other. When I did my undergrad, I thought if you're interested in science, then all science should interest you. I don't know if that makes sense. But then I realized that my interests are very specific. So
Mhm.
once I started learning about grape and wine research, like what they're actually looking at, like for example, just doing like HPLC work where we look at different compounds that are in grapes, like anthocyanins and things like that. I found that to be like incredibly interesting. I'm not exactly sure why I found it interesting, but um, versus other aspects of research, I don't find so interesting. So I would say find what you're really passionate about, find out
Yeah.
what sticks out to you and makes you excited, and then basically things will come a lot easier to you. So once I found internships I liked, it was easy to just stay in them because then you'd meet other people who could give out internships. You'd meet other collaborators and things like that.
Mhm.
Volunteering is fun if you're interested in what you're passionate about, and that can bring out new opportunities as well. So yeah, I would say that's my number one advice: is make sure you're finding something you're passionate about and find interesting, um,
Yeah.
and then just try to stick with that, and things will come a bit easier than if it's
Mm.
something that you're not super passionate about.
Absolutely. I mean, totally resonates with me. Back then when I was a grad student, I was doing flavor chemistry, and really, you know, GCMS was not my, cup of tea. And then I discovered sensory science, and that's through that experience that I was able to reorient my scientific endeavors. But you're absolutely right. You have to try and find your passion and find
Yeah,
your way and find what really motivates you.
yeah. Sometimes I would get a bit into a bit of negative thinking just because I didn't find something interesting and it was hard for me to learn it. But then I realized if I like something, it's easy to learn, and that's
Yeah,
what if you focus on those things, it's
absolutely.
your career will be a bit easier, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And we are in the period of application for our scholarship. Not the application period goes from January to the end of March. March 31st is the deadline. Uh, you've applied, once, I suppose, if I remember correctly. Any advice for any graduate students considering applying to this scholarship or any scholarship? Any advice on how to address this, particular task?
For applying for scholarships, it can be a bit intimidating. I would
Yeah.
say the first thing is to think far ahead. So if you know you're applying for scholarships in the future, do things to help build up your CV and your resume, getting experience. Don't wait until the scholarship application opens and then think, "Oh, I got to start volunteering for things." But that kind of draws back on what I was saying before. If you're passionate about things and you enjoy doing it, your CV will almost build itself, and that can be really helpful for scholarships as well. And then I would say, as far as like the more specifically for the applications, just be really careful about answering the question prompts properly, like proofread everything, have your supervisor look over it, make sure everything's okay, and try to start far ahead of time so you're not worrying so much about deadlines and things like that. Because that can be, you might wait a week and then realize, oh, I should have said this other thing.
Yeah.
So I would say planning ahead, and then once again, staying passionate about what you're doing can help you with these things. So
Yeah. And that's really, what we are also looking for is not only supporting good research, but supporting the career of future professionals in the industry. So the more you're passionate about this industry, the more it will show through your writing, your essay, definitely. Is there anything that you wanted me to ask you that I didn't ask? Anything you want to share about your research and what's ahead of you?
I think you covered most everything. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, honestly, and thank you for awarding me with the scholarship. It's been a great help with doing my research and everything. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. And as I said, the American Wine Society Educational Foundation is really about, supporting the industry at large, but also the future generation of researchers and professionals. So we are very happy to put our volunteer time, towards this mission. So very happy that you was one of the recipients. And as you may know, you can apply again.
Yeah,
And I want to thank you very much for your time, Nick, and wish you all the best for the upcoming season and your future years of research. And I'm sure our paths will cross again.
yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.